The morning sun cast long shadows across the countryside estate as Inspector James Morrison received the call that would change everything. His phone buzzed insistently on the kitchen table while he sipped his morning tea, watching the news coverage of Queen Elizabeth's recent passing. The entire nation was still in mourning, and the royal family was preparing for the most significant funeral in decades. "Morrison here," he answered, not recognizing the number on his screen. "Inspector, this is Commander Sarah Phillips from the Royal Protection Unit. We need you at Highgrove immediately. There's been a development regarding some missing royal artifacts." James nearly choked on his tea. The Royal Protection Unit only called when something serious had happened involving the monarchy. He had worked with them twice before during his 15 years with Scotland Yard, both times involving threats to minor royals during public appearances. "What kind of development?" he asked, already reaching for his coat. "The Cartier diamond tiara that belonged to the late Queen has gone missing from the royal collection. We have reason to believe it may be at a private residence in Cornwall. I'll send you the details, but we need someone with your expertise in recovery operations." James felt his pulse quicken. The Cartier diamond tiara wasn't just any piece of jewelry. It was one of the most recognizable pieces in the royal collection, worth millions of pounds and steeped in history. The Queen had worn it on her wedding day and during countless state occasions. Its disappearance so soon after her death would be a scandal of enormous proportions. Within an hour, James found himself in an unmarked police car speeding toward Cornwall, accompanied by 2 officers from the Royal Protection Unit. Commander Phillips had briefed him on the situation during the drive. According to their intelligence, the tiara had been spotted at a mansion owned by Camilla Thornberry, a wealthy socialite who had been photographed wearing similar jewelry at exclusive parties over the past year. The mansion, known as Rosewood Manor, sat on 50 acres of pristine countryside. Camilla had inherited the property from her late husband, a successful businessman who had made his fortune in shipping. She was known for her extravagant lifestyle and her collection of rare jewelry, but no one had suspected she might possess stolen royal artifacts. As they approached the imposing iron gates of the estate, James studied the intelligence files. Camilla was 45 years old, educated at prestigious schools, and moved in circles that included politicians, celebrities, and foreign dignitaries. She had no criminal record, but recent financial investigations had revealed some questionable transactions involving high-value items purchased from unnamed sources. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, with towering spires and elaborate stonework that spoke of old money and aristocratic tastes. Perfectly manicured gardens surrounded the building, and expensive cars lined the circular driveway. It was exactly the kind of place where stolen royal treasures might hide in plain sight. Commander Phillips radioed ahead to the local police, who had been discreetly monitoring the property for the past week. Their surveillance had confirmed that Camilla was currently in residence, along with several household staff and what appeared to be a private security team. "Remember," Phillips said as they pulled up to the gates, "this is a delicate situation. We're dealing with someone who has connections to powerful people. We need to handle this professionally and quietly. The last thing the royal family needs right now is a public scandal involving stolen crown jewels." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. The death of Queen Elizabeth had already created enough turmoil and media attention. If word got out that royal artifacts were being stolen and sold to private collectors, it would be a devastating blow to the monarchy's reputation. The gates opened automatically as their car approached, suggesting they were expected. James noticed security cameras tracking their movement as they drove up the winding driveway toward the mansion's main entrance. Whoever lived here clearly valued their privacy and security. A butler in formal attire greeted them at the front door, his expression politely neutral despite the early hour and unexpected visitors. "Good morning, officers. Mrs. Thornberry is expecting you in the drawing room." As they followed the butler through corridors lined with expensive artwork and antique furniture, James couldn't help but notice the obvious wealth on display. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings and priceless paintings adorned every wall. It was the kind of collection that took decades to accumulate, or significant financial resources to acquire quickly. The drawing room was equally impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the estate's gardens and comfortable seating, arranged around a massive fireplace. Camilla Thornberry rose to greet them, extending a perfectly manicured hand and offering them tea as if this were a social visit rather than a police investigation. She was exactly what James had expected, impeccably dressed, confident, and radiating the kind of calm that came from knowing you had enough money to handle almost any problem. Her jewelry was understated but obviously expensive, and her manner suggested someone accustomed to dealing with authority figures as equals rather than superiors. "Gentlemen, I assume this is about the unfortunate rumors regarding my jewelry collection," she said, settling into her chair with practiced grace. "I want to assure you that every piece in my possession has been legally acquired through reputable dealers." Commander Phillips leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Thornberry, we have credible information suggesting that you may be in possession of items that belong to the royal collection. Specifically, we're looking for the Queen's Cartier diamond tiara." For just a moment, James caught a flicker of something in Camilla's eyes. Surprise? Fear? It was gone so quickly he couldn't be sure, but her composed facade had cracked just enough to confirm they were on the right track. "I'm afraid there's been some mistake," she replied smoothly. "While I do own several tiaras, none of them belong to the royal family. You're welcome to examine my collection, of course, though I hope you understand that some of my pieces are quite delicate and valuable." James exchanged glances with Commander Phillips. Camilla's willingness to show them her collection could be genuine cooperation or a calculated move to throw them off the scent. Either way, they needed to see what she was hiding in this mansion, and they needed to find the Queen's tiara before its disappearance became public knowledge. Camilla led them through a series of corridors that seemed to go on forever, each more opulent than the last. James noticed how she moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of her domain, occasionally pausing to point out particularly valuable pieces in her collection. Ancient Greek sculptures stood beside Ming Dynasty vases, while Renaissance paintings gazed down from gilded frames. "My late husband was quite the collector," she explained as they walked. "He believed that beautiful things should be preserved and appreciated, regardless of their origin. Of course, he was always very careful to ensure everything was properly documented and legally acquired." The way she emphasized legally acquired made James wonder what she was trying to convince them of. In his experience, people who repeatedly stressed their honesty usually had something to hide. They arrived at a heavy oak door fitted with an electronic lock that required both a key code and fingerprint scanner. Camilla pressed her thumb to the device and entered a lengthy code, explaining that her most valuable pieces required extra security measures. "Insurance requirements. You understand?" she said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Some of these pieces are worth more than most people's homes." The door clicked open to reveal what could only be described as a private museum. Display cases lined the walls, each containing jewelry that sparkled under carefully positioned lighting. James had seen the crown jewels during a school trip years ago, but this collection rivaled anything in the Tower of London. Tiaras, necklaces, bracelets, and rings filled case after case, representing centuries of craftsmanship from around the world. Some pieces he recognized from auction catalogs and museum exhibitions, while others were completely unfamiliar but obviously priceless. "Impressive collection," Commander Phillips said, though his tone remained professional. "How many pieces would you estimate you have here?" "Oh, I've never counted them all," Camilla replied airily. "New acquisitions arrive regularly, and sometimes I loan pieces out for exhibitions or special events. It's quite difficult to keep track of everything." James was studying the cases systematically, looking for anything that matched the description of the Queen's tiara. The piece they were seeking was distinctive, featuring a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones in a pattern that had been designed specifically for Queen Elizabeth's wedding in 1947. It wasn't the kind of piece someone could easily mistake for something else. As they moved deeper into the room, James noticed that some of the cases appeared to have been recently rearranged. Gaps in the felt lining suggested pieces had been removed, and the positioning of some items seemed hurried rather than carefully curated. "Mrs. Thornberry," he said carefully, "have you made any changes to your collection recently? Some of these displays look like they've been modified." Camilla's hand went instinctively to her throat, a gesture James had learned to recognize as a sign of nervousness. "Oh yes, I've been reorganizing things. With all the recent attention on royal jewelry following the Queen's passing, I thought it would be appropriate to separate my British pieces from the continental European ones." "And where are the British pieces now?" Commander Phillips asked. In my private study, she replied. I've been cataloging them more carefully. Given the current circumstances, I want to ensure there's absolutely no confusion about their provenance. The three men exchanged glances. The fact that she had moved British pieces to a separate location just after the Queen's death was either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence that she knew exactly why they were there. We'd like to see those pieces as well, James said firmly. Camilla hesitated for the first time since they'd arrived. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment. The study is being renovated and everything is packed away for safety. Perhaps you could return next week when the work is completed. I'm afraid this can't wait, Commander Phillips said, his voice taking on a more authoritative tone. We have reason to believe that time is of the essence in this matter. As if on cue, James's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it discreetly and felt his stomach drop. The message was from his supervisor at Scotland Yard. Media getting wind of missing Tiara. Need resolution ASAP before story breaks. The investigation had just become a race against time. If the story broke before they recovered the tiara, it would be a disaster for the royal family and a major embarrassment for law enforcement. Mrs. Thornberry, James said, deciding to take a more direct approach. I need to be completely honest with you about why we're here. The Queen's Cartier diamond tiara has gone missing from the royal collection. We have information suggesting it may be in your possession. If that's true, returning it now could be seen as cooperation rather than theft. Camilla's composed mask finally slipped completely. Her face went pale, and she sank into a nearby chair as if her legs could no longer support her. I never meant for any of this to happen, she whispered. Harold assured me that everything was legitimate. He said the piece had been deaccessioned from the royal collection years ago and sold through proper channels. Harold? Commander Phillips prompted. Harold Blackwood. He's been my jewelry advisor for the past 3 years. He specializes in acquiring rare pieces for private collectors. Everything I've bought through him has come with proper documentation and certificates of authenticity. James felt a surge of excitement. They finally had a name and a potential explanation for how the tiara had ended up in private hands. Harold Blackwood was known to Scotland Yard as a dealer who operated in the gray areas of the art and jewelry markets, but they'd never been able to prove he was handling stolen goods. When did you acquire the tiara? He asked. 3 weeks ago, Camilla replied, her voice barely audible. Harold said it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A private collector was selling pieces from his estate, and the tiara was part of a lot that included several other significant pieces. 3 weeks ago would have been just days after the Queen's death, when the royal collection was being catalogued and secured. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Mrs. Thornberry, Commander Phillips said gently, we need to see the tiara immediately. If you cooperate with us now, we can work together to resolve this situation quietly, but if we have to obtain a search warrant, the investigation will become much more public. Camilla nodded slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. It's in the safe in my study. I'll get it for you right away. I swear I had no idea it was stolen. Harold showed me documentation proving it had been legally sold. As she stood to lead them to her study, James couldn't help but feel sorry for her. She appeared to be another victim of Blackwood's schemes rather than a criminal mastermind, but appearances could be deceiving, and he needed to remain focused on recovering the tiara and gathering evidence against the real thieves. The study was located in the mansion's east wing, accessible through a private corridor that Camilla explained was originally designed for the lord of the manor to conduct business without disturbing the household. Despite her claims about renovation work, the room appeared to be in perfect condition, with rich mahogany paneling and leather-bound books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves. James noticed immediately that this wasn't a working study, but rather a showroom designed to impress visitors. The desk was an antique piece that looked like it belonged in a museum, and the chairs were positioned for conversation rather than actual work. Everything about the room suggested it was used primarily for displaying wealth and conducting delicate negotiations. Behind an oil painting of a stern-looking gentleman in Victorian dress, Camilla revealed a wall safe that was clearly state-of-the-art despite being cleverly concealed. She entered a combination with trembling fingers, pausing twice to start over when her nervousness caused her to make mistakes. Harold insisted on the best security, she explained apologetically. He said that pieces of this caliber required protection that matched their value. When the safe finally opened, James felt his breath catch in his throat. The interior was lined with velvet and contained what appeared to be some of the most valuable jewelry he had ever seen outside of a royal collection. Necklaces that belonged in history books sat beside tiaras that must have adorned the heads of European royalty for centuries. But it was the piece in the center of the safe that commanded everyone's attention. Even in the subdued lighting of the study, the Queen's Cartier diamond tiara sparkled with an otherworldly brilliance that immediately set it apart from everything else in the collection. "There it is," Camilla said quietly, her voice filled with what sounded like genuine regret. "I only wore it once to a private dinner party last week. I thought it would be appropriate to honor the Queen's memory by displaying one of her pieces." Commander Phillips carefully lifted the tiara from the safe, handling it with the reverence appropriate for a piece of British history. Even James, who was not particularly interested in jewelry, could appreciate the extraordinary craftsmanship and the weight of royal tradition the piece represented. "Mrs. Thornberry," James said, taking out his notebook, "I need you to tell me exactly how this transaction took place. Every detail you can remember about your dealings with Harold Blackwood could be crucial to our investigation." Camilla settled into one of the leather chairs, looking suddenly older and more fragile than she had when they first met. "Harold contacted me about 3 weeks ago. He said he had acquired a collection from a private estate and wanted to offer me first refusal on several pieces before they went to auction." "Had you done business with him before?" Commander Phillips asked. "Oh yes, many times over the past 3 years. Harold has an excellent reputation among collectors. He specializes in pieces with royal provenance, though he usually deals with European nobility rather than British royalty. I've purchased several tiaras and necklaces through him, all with perfect documentation." James made careful notes as she spoke. The pattern she was describing suggested that Blackwood had been building a relationship with wealthy collectors, establishing trust through legitimate transactions before attempting to sell stolen goods. "What kind of documentation did he provide for the Queen's tiara?" he asked. Camilla rose and went to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She withdrew a folder containing several official-looking documents and handed them to James. He provided a certificate of authenticity, a provenance report tracing the piece's history, and what appeared to be a deaccession document from the royal collection. James examined the papers carefully. To an untrained eye, they would certainly appear legitimate. The documents were printed on high-quality paper with official-looking seals and signatures. However, his experience with art fraud had taught him to look for subtle signs of forgery. "The deaccession document is dated just 5 days after the Queen's death," he noted. "That would be remarkably quick for the royal collection to process the sale of such a significant piece." Harold explained that the royal family had decided to sell certain pieces privately to avoid the publicity of a formal auction, Camilla said. He said they wanted to ensure the pieces went to collectors who would appreciate their historical significance. Commander Phillips shook his head grimly. "Mrs. Thornberry, I can assure you that no pieces from the Queen's personal collection have been deaccessioned for sale. These documents are sophisticated forgeries." The color drained from Camilla's face as the full implications of her situation became clear. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I've been buying stolen royal jewelry. What's going to happen to me?" "That depends on several factors," James said, trying to strike a balance between authority and reassurance. "Your cooperation in recovering the tiara and helping us build a case against Blackwood will be taken into account. But we need to know everything about your relationship with him." Over the next hour, Camilla provided a detailed account of her dealings with Harold Blackwood. She had first met him at an auction in London 3 years earlier, where he had approached her after she successfully bid on a Victorian necklace. He had complimented her taste and offered to help her acquire similar pieces through his private network of sellers. The relationship had been profitable for both of them. Blackwood would contact her when interesting pieces became available, and she would purchase them if they fit her collection. She estimated that she had spent nearly £2 million with him over the years, acquiring pieces that would have cost significantly more through traditional auction houses. Harold always emphasized discretion, she explained. He said that many of his sellers preferred privacy for tax reasons or to avoid family disputes over inheritance. I never questioned it because the pieces were always exactly as described and the documentation appeared to be in order. James was beginning to understand how Blackwood operated. By mixing legitimate pieces with stolen goods and providing convincing forgeries of documentation, he had created a system that would be difficult for collectors to detect until law enforcement became involved. "We're going to need contact information for Blackwood," Commander Phillips said. "Phone numbers, addresses, email accounts, anything you have." Camilla provided everything she could remember, though she admitted that Blackwood was careful about maintaining his privacy. He used different phone numbers for different clients, and she had never been to his office or home. Their meetings always took place in neutral locations like hotel lounges or private clubs. "There is one thing," she said hesitantly. "Harold mentioned last week that he was working on acquiring something very special from a source inside the royal household. He said it would be the crown jewel of any collection, but he couldn't provide details until the deal was finalized." James felt a chill run down his spine. If Blackwood had access to someone inside the royal household, the theft of the Queen's tiara might be just the beginning. There were dozens of priceless pieces in the royal collection, and a corrupt insider could potentially steal items that wouldn't be missed for months or years. "Did he give you any hints about this source?" Commander Phillips asked urgently. "Only that it was someone who had access to pieces that were rarely displayed publicly," Camilla replied. "He seemed very excited about the potential for future acquisitions." The investigation had suddenly become much more serious than a simple theft case. If Blackwood had indeed compromised someone within the royal household, it represented a security breach that could have far-reaching implications for the monarchy itself. Commander Phillips immediately contacted his headquarters while James continued questioning Camilla about any other details she might remember. The possibility of an insider threat within the royal household had elevated the investigation to the highest priority level. Within minutes, additional security personnel were being dispatched to major royal residences, and a comprehensive audit of the royal collection was being initiated. "Mrs. Thornberry," James said, "I need you to think very carefully about your last conversation with Blackwood. Did he mention any names, locations, or specific pieces he was hoping to acquire?" Camilla closed her eyes, concentrating on the memory. "He was unusually talkative during our last meeting. I think the prospect of such a significant score had made him careless. He mentioned something about a contact who worked in the restoration department and had access to pieces that were being moved for cleaning and conservation." James felt his pulse quicken. The restoration and conservation staff would indeed have legitimate reasons to handle valuable pieces from the royal collection, and their work often required them to transport items between different royal residences. It would be the perfect cover for someone looking to steal pieces without immediate detection. "Did he mention which royal residence this person worked at?" Commander Phillips asked, having finished his urgent phone calls. "I believe he said something about Windsor, but I can't be certain. He was speaking in general terms, trying to impress me with the scope of his operation without revealing too many specifics. Windsor Castle housed one of the most significant royal collections outside of Buckingham Palace. If Blackwood had compromised someone there, hundreds of priceless artifacts could be at risk." The investigation was rapidly expanding beyond a simple theft case into a potential threat to British cultural heritage. James's phone rang, and he recognized the number as his supervisor at Scotland Yard. "Morrison here. James, we've got a problem. The media has gotten wind that something is missing from the royal collection. We haven't confirmed what it is yet, but we need to wrap this up quickly before it becomes a full-blown scandal." "We've recovered the tiara," James reported, "but the case has become more complicated. We may be dealing with an insider at Windsor Castle who has access to the restoration department." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Christ, that's all we need right now. The palace is already dealing with enough pressure from the transition period. I'm sending you additional resources, but you need to identify this insider before they can steal anything else." After hanging up, James turned back to Camilla. "I need you to help us contact Blackwood. We're going to set up a meeting and try to gather more information about his source within the royal household." Camilla looked terrified at the prospect. "Won't that make me an accomplice? I don't want to go to prison over this." "Your cooperation is the best way to avoid serious charges," Commander Phillips assured her. "We understand that you were deceived by sophisticated forgeries, but we need your help to catch the real criminals before they can steal more pieces." After some persuasion, Camilla agreed to contact Blackwood and arrange a meeting under the pretense of wanting to purchase additional pieces. She would wear a hidden recording device and try to get him to reveal more information about his source within the royal household. The plan was risky, but it offered their best chance of identifying the insider before more pieces went missing. James had worked undercover operations before, but never one involving the royal family. The pressure to succeed was enormous. While they waited for Blackwood to respond to Camilla's message, James and Commander Phillips conducted a thorough search of the mansion to ensure there were no other stolen royal pieces hidden on the property. They found several items that appeared to be of museum quality, but nothing else that could be definitively identified as belonging to the royal collection. Camilla provided documentation for most of her collection, and while some of the provenance reports looked questionable, there was no immediate evidence of additional thefts. It appeared that the Queen's tiara was either Blackwood's first attempt at selling stolen royal pieces to her, or the only one she had purchased. By late afternoon, Blackwood had responded to Camilla's message. He was interested in meeting to discuss new acquisitions and suggested they meet at the Langham Hotel in London the following evening. The location was perfect for their purposes, as it was public enough to be safe but private enough for a detailed conversation. "He's eager to meet," Camilla reported after reading the message. "He says he has something special to show me, something that belonged to a very important lady and would be the centerpiece of any collection." James felt his blood run cold. The timing and description suggested that Blackwood might have already stolen another piece from the royal collection. They needed to move quickly to prevent him from selling it to another unsuspecting collector. The operation was planned for the following evening. Camilla would meet Blackwood in the hotel's lounge, wearing a hidden microphone and trying to gather as much information as possible about his source and any other stolen pieces. James and Commander Phillips would be positioned nearby, ready to move in if necessary. "Remember," James instructed Camilla during their final briefing, "your goal is to get him talking about his source. Express interest in acquiring more pieces and try to get him to reveal details about how he obtains them. Don't push too hard, but see if you can find out the name of his contact at Windsor." Camilla nodded nervously. "What if he suspects something? Harold is very smart, and he might notice if I'm acting differently than usual." "Just be yourself," Commander Phillips advised. "You're a wealthy collector who is interested in acquiring rare pieces. That's exactly what you've always been in your relationship with him. The only difference is that now you know you're helping us catch a criminal." As they prepared to leave the mansion, James took one last look at the Queen's tiara, which was now secured in a police evidence bag. Recovering it had been a significant victory, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with a much larger criminal operation than they had initially suspected. The drive back to London gave him time to think about the implications of what they had discovered. If Blackwood really did have a source within the royal household, it represented a security breach that could have consequences far beyond the theft of jewelry. The royal collection contained pieces that were not only valuable, but also historically significant symbols of British heritage and monarchy. By the time they reached London, James had made a decision. Win or lose, tomorrow's operation would determine whether they could prevent a scandal that could damage the royal family during one of their most vulnerable periods. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure was not an option. The Langham Hotel buzzed with its usual evening crowd of business travelers and tourists, providing perfect cover for the undercover operation. James positioned himself at the bar with a clear view of the lounge area where Camilla would meet Blackwood, while Commander Phillips took a table near the entrance to monitor anyone entering or leaving. Camilla arrived precisely on time, looking every inch the wealthy socialite in an elegant black dress and understated jewelry. The technical team had fitted her with a nearly invisible microphone disguised as a decorative pin, and James could hear her clearly through his concealed earpiece. "Testing. On 2, she whispered as she walked past his position at the bar. The signal was crystal clear. Harold Blackwood arrived 15 minutes later, exactly as James had expected from a man who understood the importance of making an entrance. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with wealthy clients. Everything about his appearance suggested success and respectability. James studied him carefully as he greeted Camilla with air kisses and settled into the plush armchair across from her. Blackwood appeared to be in his early 50s, with silver hair and the kind of tan that came from frequent travel to expensive destinations. He looked more like a successful banker than a criminal mastermind. "Camilla, darling, you look absolutely radiant," Blackwood said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested expensive education. "I trust you're happy with your recent acquisition? The Cartier piece looked spectacular on you at Lady Morrison's dinner party." James felt his stomach tighten. Blackwood's casual reference to Camilla wearing the stolen tiara at a public event confirmed that he had no idea the theft had been discovered. This was both an advantage and a risk, as it meant he would be less guarded but also potentially more dangerous if he realized he was being set up. "It's absolutely beautiful," Camilla replied, her voice steady despite what James knew must be tremendous nervousness. "In fact, I'm so pleased with it that I was hoping you might have something similar available. You mentioned in your message that you had something special from a very important lady?" Blackwood's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a salesman sensing a major deal. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small velvet box, placing it carefully on the table between them. "This is perhaps the most significant piece I've ever had the privilege to handle," he said, opening the box to reveal what appeared to be a stunning sapphire brooch. It belonged to the Queen Mother and was one of her personal favorites. The sapphires are Burmese, absolutely flawless, and the setting is original Cartier from 1937. James felt his blood run cold. Through his earpiece, he could hear Camilla's sharp intake of breath as she recognized the significance of what she was being shown. The Queen Mother's brooch was not just valuable, it was one of the most recognizable pieces in the royal collection, having been photographed countless times at state occasions. "It's breathtaking," Camilla managed to say. "But surely something like this would be impossible to acquire through normal channels. How did you manage to obtain it?" Blackwood leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering his voice just enough to make James strain to hear through the background noise of the hotel lounge. "Let's just say I have a very special relationship with someone who understands the value of beautiful things and believes they should be appreciated by people who can truly afford them." "Someone inside the palace?" Camilla pressed gently. "Even better," Blackwood replied with obvious pride. "Someone with legitimate access to pieces that are rarely displayed publicly. The beauty of my arrangement is that these items can be missing for months before anyone notices they're gone. And by then, they're safely in private collections where they can be properly appreciated." James exchanged glances with Commander Phillips across the room. Blackwood's confession was being recorded clearly, providing crucial evidence for their case, but they needed more specific information about his source within the royal household. "That sounds like quite an operation," Camilla said admiringly. "Your contact must be very well positioned to have access to such extraordinary pieces." "Oh, they are indeed," Blackwood confirmed. 23 years of loyal service to the crown with absolutely impeccable credentials. No one would ever suspect them of anything inappropriate. It's the perfect inside position." James made mental notes of the details. 23 years of service would help them narrow down potential suspects within the Windsor Castle staff. Combined with the earlier mention of the restoration department, they were building a profile of their target. "And they're willing to continue providing pieces?" Camilla asked. "For the right price, absolutely. The royal family has so many treasures that some pieces sit in storage for years without being displayed or even cataloged properly. My contact sees it as rescuing these beautiful objects from neglect and ensuring they're properly valued." James could hardly believe what he was hearing. Blackwood and his accomplice had convinced themselves that they were performing some kind of service by stealing priceless royal artifacts. The arrogance was staggering. "Speaking of price," Camilla said, "what would something like the Queen Mother's brooch cost?" "For a piece of this significance, I'm asking £800,000, Blackwood replied without hesitation. "I know it seems expensive, but consider what you'd pay at auction for something with comparable royal provenance, assuming such a piece ever came to market through legitimate channels. £800,000 for a piece worth several million was indeed a bargain, but only because it was stolen property that could never be publicly displayed or sold through legitimate channels." James wondered how many other wealthy collectors had fallen into the same trap as Camilla. "I'm very interested," Camilla said convincingly, "but I'd want to verify the provenance more thoroughly than I did with the tiara. Could your contact provide additional documentation about the piece's history?" Blackwood hesitated for the first time during their conversation. "That might be challenging," My contact prefers to maintain a low profile for obvious reasons. Too much documentation could potentially compromise their position. Of course I understand, Camilla replied quickly. Perhaps I could arrange to meet them directly? I'd be willing to pay a premium for the assurance of dealing with the source. Absolutely not, Blackwood said firmly. My contact's anonymity is non-negotiable. That's the only way this arrangement can continue to work for everyone involved. James realized they had pushed as far as they could without arousing suspicion. Blackwood was clearly protective of his source's identity, and pressing further might cause him to become suspicious of Camilla's motives. Well, then, Camilla said, I suppose I'll have to trust your judgment as I have in the past. When could we complete the transaction for the Queen Mother's brooch? I could have it ready for delivery by tomorrow evening, Blackwood replied eagerly. The usual arrangement regarding payment and discretion, of course. Of course, Camilla agreed. Should we meet here again? Actually, I prefer to handle final transactions at my private office. More secure for both of us. I'll send you the address tomorrow morning. James felt a surge of excitement. If Blackwood was willing to bring them to his office, they would have access to his files and potentially evidence linking him to other thefts. It was exactly the break they needed to build a comprehensive case against him and identify his accomplice within the royal household. The address Blackwood provided led them to an elegant Georgian townhouse in Mayfair, the kind of property that screamed old money and respectability. James and his team had spent the night preparing for what they hoped would be the final phase of their operation. Search warrants had been obtained, backup officers were positioned around the block, and technical specialists were ready to examine any evidence they might find. Remember, Commander Phillips briefed the team one final time, our primary objectives are to arrest Blackwood, recover the Queen Mother's brooch, and identify his accomplice within the royal household. Everything else is secondary. Camilla looked pale but determined as they reviewed her final instructions. She would enter the building first for the supposed transaction, giving the team time to position themselves. Once she had confirmed Blackwood's presence and location within the building, they would move in to make the arrest. I know this has been difficult for you, James told her quietly, but your cooperation is going to prevent a major scandal and potentially save countless other artifacts from being stolen. She nodded, checking her appearance in the mirror one last time. I just hope Harold doesn't realize what's happening until it's too late. If he escapes, he could warn his contact at Windsor. At precisely 2 o'clock, Camilla approached the front door of the townhouse. The building appeared to be divided into several offices, with brass nameplates suggesting it housed various high-end consulting firms and financial advisors. Blackwood's office was listed as Heritage Acquisitions Limited on the 3rd floor. Through her hidden microphone, the team heard her climb the stairs and knock on Blackwood's door. His voice was warm and welcoming as he invited her in, clearly excited about completing what he expected to be a very profitable transaction. Camilla, perfect timing as always, they heard him say. I've prepared everything for our transaction. The brooch is even more beautiful in natural light, and I think you're going to be absolutely delighted with it. James waited for her signal that she was safely inside and had confirmed Blackwood's location before giving the order to move. The team entered the building quietly, using the stairwell to avoid the elevator and potential noise that might alert their target. As they reached the 3rd floor, James could hear Blackwood's voice through the office door, describing the historical significance of the Queen Mother's brooch in loving detail. He seemed completely unaware that his criminal empire was about to come crashing down around him. The sapphires were personally selected by the Queen Mother herself, Blackwood was saying. She wore this piece to some of the most important state occasions of the 20th century. Owning it is like owning a piece of British history. James positioned his team outside the door, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They needed to catch Blackwood with the stolen brooch in his possession and gather any evidence that might be present in his office before he could destroy it. Now then, they heard Blackwood continue, if you're ready to proceed with the payment, I can transfer ownership immediately. As usual, I'll provide you with documentation for your insurance purposes, though we both understand the need for discretion regarding the piece's recent provenance. Actually, Harold, Camilla said, her voice slightly shaky, I have a confession to make. James felt his heart skip a beat. That wasn't part of the plan. Camilla was supposed to maintain her cover until they were ready to move in. Oh? Blackwood's voice carried a note of confusion. "I'm not here to buy the brooch," Camilla continued. "I'm here because the Queen's tiara you sold me was stolen, and the police have asked me to help them catch you." There was a moment of stunned silence before James heard the sound of chairs scraping against the floor and what sounded like Blackwood moving quickly around the office. "Move, move, move," James shouted, and his team burst through the door just as Blackwood was reaching for what appeared to be a paper shredder filled with documents. "Police, step away from the shredder and put your hands where we can see them." Blackwood froze, his hand still reaching toward the machine. His face had gone completely white, and his earlier confidence had evaporated entirely. On the desk in front of him, the Queen Mother's brooch sparkled in its velvet box, providing clear evidence of his criminal activity. "Harold Blackwood," James said formally, "you're under arrest for theft of royal property and conspiracy to defraud. You have the right to remain silent." As James read him his rights, Commander Phillips began examining the documents that Blackwood had been trying to destroy. Even a quick glance revealed what appeared to be correspondence with multiple collectors, detailed records of stolen pieces, and most importantly, communication with someone identified only as CW at Windsor Castle. "James," Phillips called quietly, "you need to see this." The letter Phillips handed him was dated just 1 week earlier and contained details about upcoming conservation work that would require moving several pieces from the Queen's private collection. The information was exactly what a thief would need to know which pieces would be temporarily vulnerable and when they could be stolen without immediate detection. "Mr. Blackwood," James said, turning back to their prisoner, "we know you have an accomplice at Windsor Castle. Your cooperation in identifying this person could significantly reduce the charges you're facing." Blackwood stared at him for a long moment before his shoulders sagged in defeat. "Her name is Catherine Williams," he said quietly. "She's worked in the conservation department at Windsor for over 20 years. She started feeding me information about 3 years ago when she was facing financial difficulties due to her mother's medical expenses." James felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. They had identified the insider, but the revelation that someone had been driven to crime by personal financial pressures reminded him that there were often complex human stories behind even the most serious crimes. "We'll need you to provide us with complete details about your arrangement with Ms. Williams," Commander Phillips said. "How many pieces has she helped you steal? And are there any other collectors who may have purchased stolen royal property?" Over the next several hours, Blackwood provided a detailed confession that revealed the scope of his operation. In addition to the Queen's tiara and the Queen Mother's brooch, he had stolen and sold 7 other pieces from the royal collection over the past 18 months. The total value of the stolen items exceeded £5 million. Catherine Williams was arrested at Windsor Castle that evening, bringing to an end a conspiracy that could have continued indefinitely, if not for the vigilant inventory procedures following the Queen's death. She broke down immediately when confronted with the evidence, expressing deep remorse for betraying the trust placed in her. "I never meant for it to go this far," she sobbed during her interview. "Harold said we would only take a few pieces that wouldn't be missed. I needed the money for my mother's care, and it seemed like such a small thing compared to all the treasures that just sit in storage." James filed his final report 3 days later, noting that all stolen pieces had been recovered and both conspirators had confessed to their crimes. The case had been resolved without any public scandal, protecting the royal family during a particularly sensitive period. But as he sat in his office reflecting on the investigation, James couldn't help but think about the human cost of the crimes they had solved. 2 people had thrown away their careers and their freedom, all for treasures that they could never truly possess or enjoy. The real tragedy wasn't just the threat to Britain's cultural heritage, but the way greed and desperation had corrupted people who should have been protectors of that heritage. The Queen's tiara was quietly returned to the royal collection, where it would remain safe for future generations, and in a small way, justice had been served for the late Queen's memory, ensuring that her most precious possessions would continue to honor her legacy, rather than enriching criminals who had never understood their true value.